quiet, but Bruno's body told a different story. He sat beside his handler Malik, eyes locked on something no one else noticed. To the cafe crowd, he was just a guide dog, but his posture said otherwise. Tense, calculating, ready. Malik, blind but unshaken, reached for his coffee, unaware that something had already shifted. What happened next would tear through that peaceful street like a bullet through silence. And Bruno? He wouldn't bark, he wouldn't flinch, he would remember. Like, share, and subscribe, because once this begins, you won't believe what a dog like him is truly capable of. The morning light in Glendale was soft, filtered through the dusty windows of the coffee shop like a faded photograph left too long in the sun. The air outside was still cool, not yet touched by the heat that would rise with the noon sun. Birds called lazily from the power lines, and the aroma of roasted beans drifted through the door every time it opened with the cheerful chime of the bell. Inside, people murmured over their drinks, the clatter of porcelain cups merging with quiet laughter, and the occasional rustle of newspaper. And then there was Malik Thompson. He sat at his usual table by the front window, not because he could see the light that poured through it, but because Bruno always led him there. The German shepherd's instincts were sharp, his choices deliberate. Malik didn't need sight to feel the reverence people gave them when they passed. Bruno walked with a quiet power, his tan and backsfur trimmed tight, his ears twitching at even the softest sounds. Malik, dressed in a navy hoodie and fitted jeans, traced the lid of his coffee cup with one calloused finger, while his other hand rested gently on Bruno's harness. The leather was worn, creased by years of service, not as a guide dog but something more. Bruno had a history. They both did. The warmth of the coffee seeped through the paper cup, grounding Malik in the rhythm of his mornings. He didn't speak much, didn't need to. He came here because it was safe, familiar. Because Bruno relaxed here, even if only a little. Except today, Bruno didn't lie down. He stood, muscles taut, legs locked, his chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, but his neck was arched forward, and his eyes were fixed on something Malik couldn't see. The leash tightened slightly in Malik's hand. Not a yank, just enough for him to notice, enough for a man trained to read body language to sense the tension in the fibers of a being to know something had shifted. Easy, boy, Malik murmured under his breath, thumb brushing gently over the rough. Bruno didn't respond. No tail wag, no shift in posture, just stillness like a statue carved from alertness. Malik lifted his chin slightly, tuning his ears toward the room. His other senses filled the void left by sight, sound, vibration, energy. He heard the scrape of a chair, the hiss of the espresso machine, the quiet rhythm of tapping on a laptop. All normal. Then something off. A pause. The click of heavy boots. Not work boots, something harder, more deliberate. The kind you wear when you want to make your presence known. And then a voice. Not hostile, not loud, but too confident. "That's a handsome dog you got there." Malik turned his head. The voice had come from outside just beyond the front door. Bruno had already rotated his body slightly, placing himself subtly between the sound and his handler. Malik let out a breath through his nose. People commented on Bruno all the time. It was nothing new, but there was something clipped in that voice, a coolness that didn't quite match the compliment. Bruno didn't growl, but Malik felt the tension spike along the leash again. He gripped the harness a bit tighter. The man walked past the glass, his silhouette briefly shadowing the sunlight. Malik couldn't see him, but he could picture the shape, the way footsteps landed too slow and wide. Swagger. He hated swagger. Bruno's breathing deepened. Malik pressed his palm firmly over the dog's shoulder, grounding him. Bruno didn't move. Minutes passed, the smell of bacon and cinnamon rolls returned to dominate the air. Malik tried to sip his coffee, but his throat felt tight. His senses had grown sharper in darkness, and something inside him always knew, sometimes before Bruno even reacted. A gentle breeze slid through the open door, carrying with it the scent of metal, sweat, and tobacco. Not the fresh kind, the old kind. Worn leather, gasoline, motor oil. Malik didn't need to hear the engine rumble to know what kind of man had just stepped inside. He didn't lift his head, but he whispered almost inaudibly, "You feel that too, huh?" Brunali's ears swiveled, but still he didn't bark. He was trained better than that. Born for restraint, born for the second command. Malik tried to shake it off. He didn't want to judge. He'd been judged too many times in his life. For his skin, for his silence, for the scars on his back, but Bruno had never been wrong, not once. Bass chair scraped. A deep casual laugh echoed near the register. It sounded manufactured, like someone performing for attention. Bruno's tail flicked, barely brushing Malik's leg. He knew that signal. Not danger yet, but warning. Malik finished his coffee in silence. The cup was empty, but he didn't move. Neither did Bruno. The world kept turning, but something under the surface was shifting, like two tectonic plates rubbing, building pressure. Outside, a motorcycle revved once. Then again, the same laugh echoed back, but this time sharper, more directed. Malik heard a chair knock over, accidental or intentional. Bruno didn't flinch. He stood like a line drawn in sand, unmovable. Malik felt the familiar ache behind his eyes, not from strain, but from knowing. From knowing that peace didn't last, that calm was often just the echo before the thunder. And when that thunder finally rolled in, Malik and Bruno would already be ready. The tremor came not from the ground but from the street, a low, feral growl of engines that vibrated through the glass windows like a warning. The sound rolled through the peaceful hum of the cafe, cutting through conversation like a blade across silk. Malik felt it before he heard it. Bruno's body tensed, a taut wire drawn across the earth, his shoulder brushing Malik's knee like a coded signal. The air changed, conversations paused. Cups halted mid-air, the kind of silence that follows only when something unnatural steps into the natural. Tires squealed against asphalt, 3 of them, loud and deliberate. The roar didn't die out with the engines, it stayed lingering in the bones of the building. The door flung open with no subtlety, letting in heat, dust, and presence. Boots hit the tile with thuds that weren't accidental. Chuck entered first. He moved like a man who'd never been told no, who found pleasure in discomforting others. His leather jacket clung to his frame, patches stitched across the sleeves like battle scars from a life of bad decisions and worse intentions. His jeans were torn at the knees, not by trend but by time and violence. Sunglasses hid half his expression, but the other half the curl of his lip, the sharpness in his jaw, the twitch in his fingers spoke of a predator walking into a room of prey. Behind him followed 2 other bikers, less distinctive, more like shadows of their leader. One had a bandana across his neck, the other a snake tattoo curling around his wrist. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The noise they carried with them said enough. Bruno didn't bark. He didn't growl. He did something far more alarming. He stood perfectly still, staring, focused, like a lock had been turned inside his mind and a vault had opened a place Malik hadn't seen accessed in years. Chuck scanned the room, eyes dancing from patron to patron like he was sizing them up for sport. Then his gaze fell on Bruno. His step faltered, not visibly to most, but Bruno caught. Malik felt the leash twitch. Then, Chuck smiled, not the kind of smile that reached the eye. He walked straight toward Malik's table, removing his sunglasses as he did so, revealing the scar that ran down the left side of his face like a strike from something serrated and unforgiving. That scar had stories. Malik couldn't see it, but Bruno remembered it. That was clear now. Chuck leaned a hand casually on the back of the empty chair across from Malik. He said, voice gravelly, steeped in the kind of confidence that only comes from surviving too many fights you probably started. Malik tilted his head. Not bad, he replied evenly. He could smell leather, sweat, and a faint trace of gasoline. Not fresh. This man had been riding for hours. There was something about the cadence of his breath, the subtle crack in his voice that made Malik's stomach tighten. Bruno's breathing had gone shallow. His eyes locked. Malik could feel the heat radiating off his dog's body like a low burning fire. Chuck's gaze dropped to Bruno. His smile widened but not kindly. Well damn, he said, crouching slightly to eye level. Ain't you a handsome one? Bruno didn't flinch, didn't blink, but his ears twitched. One subtle flick. Malik could almost hear the gears turning. Chuck's fingers flexed at his side. A tick, nervous, calculating. Malik kept his expression still. His voice dropped half a register. You ride that Harley parked outside? Chuck chuckled. That obvious? He didn't look up. His attention stayed on Bruno, who still hadn't moved an inch. Fine dog you've got here. Malik tilted his chin slightly. He's more than a dog. Chuck stayed back up, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket. Oh, I know. His voice was lower now, darker. I've seen eyes like that before, a long time ago. He leaned closer to Malik's ear. Voice like smoke. Did you get him from the 90? Malik froze. Just half a second. Just a pause and breath. But it was enough for Bruno to respond. A half step forward, a slight tilt of the head movement only Malik could interpret. Chuck saw it. He saw the flicker in Bruno's posture. He leaned back and whistled softly. Well, I'll be damned. Behind him, his buddies chuckled low, more to themselves than anyone else. Malik didn't move, but inside his mind was racing. 90th? That wasn't public knowledge. Bruno's former unit was classified. The operations they ran deep, dangerous, dark. If Chuck knew that... Chuck took a step back, but his tone remained playful. Didn't think I'd see this mud again, he said, not hiding the venom now. Last time I saw those eyes, they were behind the muzzle of a dog that almost took my leg off. Bruno exhaled. A short, controlled breath. Malik's hand subtly shifted over his harness. A silent message. Hold. Chuck turned to his men. You remember the one from Jakarta? The one with the bandana? Shit, yeah. Took out 2 guys before we even breached the wall. Chuck snapped his fingers. Same dog. Or maybe they all just look alike when they're bred to kill. Malik's hand gripped tighter around the leash. Not in fear, but to steady the weight of memory flooding back. He hadn't known the full extent of Bruno's final mission. They never told him everything. But now pieces began to form in the dark like shapes emerging through fog. Chuck's voice dropped again. You ever wonder what it's like to be hunted by something that never forgets? He tapped the table. He do. Every damn night. He walked away then, laughing softly as he rejoined his crew near the counter. Brula didn't move until the last step echoed behind them. Malik whispered under his breath. That wasn't random. Brula finally blinked. Just once. Then his gaze returned to the front door. Chuck hadn't been gone more than 60 seconds when Malik heard the clack of boots again. Same cadence, same weight. Like the ground underfoot didn't matter. Bruno's ears twitched first. Then his body followed with a near imperceptible shift. The kind of realignment a soldier makes when the threat hasn't passed but changed shape. Malik's fingers tensed around the handle of his coffee cup. Instead, he did something far rarer. He took half a step backward. Just a half step. A retreat? No, Bruno never retreated. Malik's brows furrowed slightly as he tilted his head, confused. The leash remained taut but not strained. He knew that kind of movement. Bruno wasn't afraid. He was evaluating, adjusting. Then Malik caught it too faint, sharp, coppery, not the smell of rust or engine oil. Blood. The scent was distant but pungent, like it had clung to someone's clothing, fresh enough to be recent. Bruno's reaction confirmed it. His body stilled again, but now every muscle was humming beneath his skin. Tail low, stance rigid. That wasn't nervousness. That was something else entirely. A hunter scenting prey, or worse, an old predator realizing another had just killed. The boots stopped in front of their table. Malik turned his head slightly, angling his ear toward the sound. Chuck didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. His presence was like smoke curling into a room impossible to ignore once it was there. Malik lifted his chin, his face calm, neutral. Bruno's eyes were fixed directly on the man, unmoving, golden irises locked and tracking. Well, Chuck said with exaggerated casualness. Malik didn't answer. His left hand moved subtly along Bruno's back, fingers tracing a pattern down the dog's spine. Bruno didn't respond physically, but Malik could feel the animal's pulse through the leather harness. Steady. Alert. Chuck leaned in, the tone of his voice dipping slightly, mock concern bleeding into the words. You know, it's kind of ironic sitting here all noble and calm with a war dog for a babysitter. What, they run out of Labradors? Bruno's eyes narrowed, jaw tensing just slightly. Malik smiled faintly, not at the insult but at the predictability. You always talk this much to strangers? Only the ones with good company. He dropped his voice and added, or interesting pasts. Malik kept his breathing even. Bruno didn't move, but the space between them and Chuck felt electrified, like air before lightning. You ever wonder, Chuck continued, stepping around the table, dragging his boots slightly on purpose, what it's like to rely on something that could turn on you? Malik's smile faded. Not once. Chuck exhaled through his nose. Yeah, you wouldn't. There was a pause. A long, calculated one. Bruno's tail flicked once, slow and low. Chuck must have noticed because he turned his attention back to the dog. Still got that canine training in him. Huh? You can see it? The way he breathes. The way he watches. Like he remembers everything. Bruno shifted, barely, to his shoulder rotated and squared toward Chuck's position. Chuck leaned slightly closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You think he remembers me? Malik's hand tightened reflexively around the leash. Maybe, he said softly, but I guarantee you he hasn't forgiven. Chuck smirked. Cute. Then he glanced down and nudged the edge of the table with his foot, small, deliberate. Bruno's eyes followed the movement, not the foot but the gesture. Malik's face didn't change, but his voice did. You've got something on your boots. Chuck looked down instinctively, then laughed when he saw the drying smear of red near the sole. Oh, that? You know how it is. Life gets messy. Malik didn't smile this time. You should clean up before walking into places like this. Chuck shrugged. You say that like someone's watching. I don't have to see to know what stinks. Malik replied. Chuck's laughter cracked again, short, sharp, but it didn't reach his eyes. Something in him flickered, and he straightened up, withdrawing half a step. You know, this moment, it's cute, but the thing about old dogs? He looked directly into Bruno's eyes. They don't always bite. Sometimes they just watch while the world burns. Bruno let out a low breath, not a growl, not yet. But Malik could feel the tremble in the leash, the slow rise of something patient and deadly. Chuck turned to go, tossing one last barb over his shoulder. Watch your step, Malik. You wouldn't want to trip on someone else's mess. He walked back to the counter, where his two friends pretended to be amused by something on their phones. Malik remained still, one hand on the table, one on Bruno's shoulder. Blood? He whispered. Brunel didn't react, but Malik already knew the answer. The man had walked in with violence on his shoes. And Bruno never forgot a scent like that. Malik sat still at the table, posture calm, hands relaxed. But his breath had changed. It came shallower, tighter. The tension in the room had thickened, unseen but palpable, like invisible threads pulled taut from wall to wall. Bruno hadn't moved, but Malik could feel it, an electric storm gathering from the dog's skin, a current old and deep waking from sleep. The scent of blood still lingered faintly. Malik tilted his head subtly, his voice low and deliberate, only loud enough for Bruno to catch. Bruno. Guard. The moment the word left Malik's lips, something imperceptible shifted in Bruno. Not a bark, not a growl. Just a stillness too still, a silence too sharp, like a soldier hearing the click of a switch deep within himself. Bruno's posture shifted by fractions. His front paw moved 1 inch forward. His eyes narrowed. He felt the leash grow warm in his hand. Bruno's blood was running hot now, flowing with code, training, instinct, memory. That word guard was more than a command. It was a trigger. The last time Malik had used it was nearly 3 years ago, in a simulated hostage extraction. Bruno had been faster than any dog in the unit, efficient, clean, controlled. And now, inside a quiet cafe in Glendale, that same spirit had been called forward again. Chuck didn't know it yet. Or maybe he did. Maybe he sensed it. Maybe that's why he stayed too long. Maybe that's why he kept circling. His voice floated from across the cafe where he was back near the counter, laughing too loudly at something that wasn't funny. His buddies chuckled on cue, the kind of laughter that came from men who had learned to follow rather than think. Malik didn't speak again. He didn't have to. Bruno now stood slightly to the left, his body blocking part of the aisle without looking like a threat. But Malik could feel the transformation. The dog was calculating, listening, tracking every breath and footstep. And then, without warning, Chuck stepped back toward them. There was no need for words this time. No insults, no showy performance. Just motion. Chuck stopped at a nearby table, looked directly at Bruno and, without even glancing down, kicked one of the empty chairs with his boot. It slid across the tile with a screech loud and sudden, cutting through the murmur of the cafe like a knife. Then it hit the leg of Malik's table and ricocheted fast, metal frame skimming across the floor directly toward Bruno's front paw. To everyone else, it looked like a clumsy, dumb act, a biker being an asshole, a chair in the way, maybe even an accident. But Bruno knew, and Malik knew, and Chuck, deep down, knew exactly what he was testing. Bruno moved before the chair reached him, not backward, not sideways, but with a sharp pivot, just enough to let the chair pass with inches to spare. His paws didn't scrape, his claws didn't clatter. It was smooth, tactical, not a reaction and execution. And then came the sound, not a bark, not a snarl, a growl low, controlled, a vibration more than a noise. It wasn't meant for the crowd, it was meant for the man. Chuck paused mid-step, his foot hovered slightly too long above the tile. Bruno held the growl steady, his muzzle slightly parted, ears angled forward. Eyes locked not on the man's face but his hands. His weight shifted subtly to his hind legs, as if calculating launch distance. The growl hit a frequency only certain people could recognize. It wasn't loud, but it hit like a memory. Chuck's smile faltered for the first time. Just slightly. He glanced at Bruno and Malik, even though blind, but Bruno didn't relax. And neither did Malik. Malik slowly stood up from his chair. He didn't move quickly. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a hand on Bruno's harness and said quietly, "Still." Bruno stilled, but he didn't break his line of sight. The cafe had fallen mostly silent. A few customers were watching now, pretending not to, holding their drinks halfway to their mouths. Phones were out, angled just low enough to not be obvious. Chuck stepped back and raised both hands mockingly. All right. Man can't even kick a chair without causing a scene." Malik tilted his head again. "You didn't kick a chair, you sent a message." Chuck's eyes narrowed. "You think so?" Growled again. Lower this time, quieter, but more primal. Chuck took another step back. One of his friends murmured something Malik could hear. Bruno's eyes never blinked. Malik said nothing. The scene was frozen in time. Chuck, the dog, the silence, the smell of old oil and new blood. And outside, somewhere past the windows, the sky was beginning to dim. Twilight always came fast in Glendale, too fast. And some things wake at dusk. Chuck's smirk cracked into something wider, something that tried too hard to look like confidence but reeked of desperation. His voice sharpened, rose above the hush that had fallen over the cafe. "You think I'm afraid of a damn dog?" His words sliced through the air like a thrown blade. Loud, deliberate, not just for Malik but for everyone watching. People shifted in their seats. The sound of phones being pulled from pockets whispered louder than the coffee machine now. A soft chorus of taps, record buttons, lenses aimed low but purposeful. Malik didn't move. He stood tall beside Bruno, his hand resting on the dog's back like an anchor. Bruno had already repositioned one paw ahead, body turned, protecting the space between Malik and Chuck with silent precision. His growl had faded into a vibrating hum in his throat, the frequency you didn't hear so much as feel. It curled into the floorboards, climbed up metal chair legs, pulsed through the soles of shoes. Chuck took 2 steps forward. Too close. Bruno moved instantly. No lunge, no attack. Just a shift. He placed his body directly in front of Malik. Chest squared, shoulders tense, tail low and rigid. His upper lip pulled back slightly, revealing a clean row of teeth honed more by purpose than instinct. He didn't bark. He didn't snap. He simply existed in full readiness. Someone in the corner gasped softly. Another whispered, "Don't punch him, man." Chuck ignored them. His ego had taken the wheel. He needed control back, and the only way he knew how was to provoke. "What's he gonna do, huh?" he said, gesturing to Bruno. "You gonna sick him on me? You think you're safe 'cause of him?" "Nah, man, you're hiding." Malik's voice came low, steady, steel wrapped in velvet. "I'm standing." Chuck scoffed and took another step forward, but this time Bruno's growl climbed half a note. Still not loud, but sharp enough to send a message. Chuck paused, momentarily unsure. The crowd's attention had fully turned now. No one sipped coffee, no one typed on laptops. Every camera pointed his way, and Bruno's eyes flicked to the movement. cataloged it, calculated risk and trajectory, but didn't advance. Malik's hand squeezed the harness gently, his own way of saying hold. Bruno obeyed. Chuck sneered, trying to reclaim ground. He's bluffing. You're bluffing. If he was really that dangerous, he'd be on me already. Bruno curled his lip another fraction higher, his snout lowering by a degree, nostrils flaring. His body didn't shift, but the tension radiating from him felt like heat off asphalt. Malik tilted his chin toward Chuck, his expression unreadable. He's not bluffing. He's choosing. The words hung in the air, heavy and real. Chuck looked around, eyes darting to the phones, the watching faces. He was being filmed, scrutinized, judged. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was about how this moment would live forever online. He laughed nervously, throwing his hands up as if it had all been a joke. Relax, people. I'm just messing. Big bad dog doesn't scare me. But Malik could hear it. The slight break in the voice, the way the final syllables curled inward like they were trying to hide. Bruno's eyes remained locked on the man, unblinking. He hadn't moved a muscle in nearly 15 seconds. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like obedient stillness. But Malik knew better. Bruno was thinking, calculating, every muscle ready, every instinct coiled like a spring but held back. Because somewhere deep beneath the teeth and training was something more evolved. Not fear, not rage, restraint. Chuck dropped his arms and backed away one step, then two. The crowd didn't relax. If anything, the tension thickened. The moment wasn't over. Then, just as he reached his buddies again, Chuck spun around and pointed dramatically at Malik. You think that mutt's gonna save you from the real world? Malik didn't answer. He didn't need to. Bruno's presence was the answer. One of the women in the back corner whispered, that dog, he's not just a pet, is... Malik turned slightly toward her voice. No, he's justice with a heartbeat. Chuck snorted and muttered something under his breath, then tried to laugh again. The laugh cracked mid-breath and didn't finish. Malik slowly sat back down, Bruno resuming his stance beside him, eyes still fixed in one direction. Attention still hummed through his frame. The room didn't breathe. Something had shifted. Lines had been drawn, and Bruno had chosen not to cross them, not out of weakness, but wisdom. The tension lingered even after Chuck had backed away, leaving behind a silence that crackled through the cafe like static. Malik sat, unmoving, his hand still resting on Bruno's back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of the dog's breath, the heat of his focus. Around them, the murmurs returned gradually, hesitant and low, like the crowd wasn't quite sure if the moment was over or simply paused. A chair scraped softly. A cup clinked too loud against a saucer. Then, a new voice cut through the uncertainty, not panicked, not confused, but sharp and firm like the crack of a gavel. She stood near the far end of the room, dressed in a gray blazer, her hair in a tight bun, her stance precise and unshaken. All eyes turned to her, including Chuck's. His swagger paused mid-shift, one boot half-turned toward the door. Malik turned his head toward the sound. Bruno's ears flicked. Chuck sneered, "Excuse me." The woman stepped forward, her voice "You've had your fun, Mr. Dobson, but I think it's time you left these people alone." A flicker passed through Chuck's expression. His smirk faltered, just enough for Malik to sense it, to recognize a fracture beneath the bravado. He didn't respond right away, and the woman didn't blink. Bruno remained still, but his head tilted, body pivoting slightly to face her. Chuck cleared his throat. "Do I know you?" he asked, his tone losing just a hair of its venom. "You should," she replied. 2 years ago, Maricopa County Superior Court. Case 20,984. She waited, letting the number hang in the air like a gun drawn but not yet fired. Aggravated assault, intimidation, resisting arrest. You made a mess of a quiet intersection with a tire iron and a bottle of wild turkey. Chuck's eyes narrowed. "I was the prosecuting attorney," she said. "You took a plea, 18 months probation and anger management classes you never finished." The cafe had gone still again, a new kind of silence now not born from fear but recognition. Chuck's smile returned, but now it twitched. He looked away, scoffing like it didn't matter. "Lady, that was a long time ago." "Not long enough," she replied, And I still remember the look on your face when they brought the dog in to testify with the handler. You couldn't stop sweating for 45 minutes. Malik raised an eyebrow slightly. He hadn't known that part. But Bruno, without needing words, gave the smallest reaction, a shift in breath. A memory confirmed. Chuck looked around, saw the faces watching, the phone still recording. His lips pressed into a line. Then he shrugged theatrically and turned toward the door. "Whatever," he said. "I've got places to be anyway. Enjoy your coffee, blind man." He pushed through the door with his shoulder, the bell above it jangling too loud too long. His boots hit the pavement in a rhythm designed to echo. The door swung back, then slowed, then clicked shut. Malik didn't move. Bruno didn't sit. The leash remained taut in his hand, vibrating with restraint. The woman in the blazer walked closer, her heels tapping a deliberate rhythm. "You okay?" she asked gently. Malik nodded. "Yeah, thanks for stepping in." She crouched a little, meeting Bruno's line of sight. "He hasn't lost a step," Malik exhaled softly. "No, he hasn't." They shared a look, brief, quiet, respectful. Then she straightened, nodded once, and returned to her table. Outside, an engine fired up, loud, deliberate. The cafe windows buzzed from the vibration. Malik turned his ear toward the sound. Harley V-twin, mid-size build, custom pipes, sounded tuned for attention. The engine didn't fade. It stayed, idling. Bruno turned toward the door. His ears perked, tail still, eyes locked like he could see through glass and walls and miles. Malik's fingers tightened around the leash. The engine revved once, then again. People glanced toward the windows, trying to see, but the glare of the midday sun obscured everything. Malik didn't need to see. He knew that engine wasn't moving away, it was waiting. And Bruno knew it too. His stance didn't relax. If anything, he leaned forward half an inch, nose slightly elevated. Jaw clenched, the sounds stretched into a taunt. Then finally, Silas squealed slightly. The motorcycle pulled away too fast for the narrow road out front. The roar faded down the street, but Malik stayed still, listening to the way the echo clung to the buildings a little too long. Bruno's body didn't ease, not even after the sound disappeared. Malik bent his head slightly. That wasn't goodbye, was it? Bruno didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe easy. And Malik knew some exits aren't endings, some are preludes. The quiet followed Malik home like a shadow that refused to detach. As he stepped into his apartment, the familiar scent of cedarwood and worn leather welcomed him, but it no longer brought comfort. He moved carefully through the small space, Bruno at his side, their steps in perfect sync. The sun had set an hour ago, and the city beyond the window had slipped into its usual nighttime murmur of distant engines. Faraway sirens and occasional laughter echoing up from the sidewalk. Malik removed his shoes, placing them neatly beside the mat, then ran his fingers along the kitchen counter, touching each familiar edge like a pianist reacquainting with the keys before the first note. Bruno didn't lie down. He didn't circle his spot beside the couch. He didn't stretch or yawn. Instead, he walked directly to the door and sat, his back straight, his ears perked, his gaze locked not at the handle, but beyond it into something neither walls nor locks could keep out. Malik paused mid-reach for the kettle. He knew the sound of Bruno's body when it rested, when it relaxed, when it trusted the night to hold still. But this sound, this silence, was armored. "Bruno," Malik said softly, "you coming over here or what?" The dog didn't move. The harness lay untouched near the door. Bruno kept his post like a sentinel carved from stone. Malik poured water into the kettle, flipped the switch and leaned on the counter. "You felt it too, huh?" Bruno's only response was a subtle twitch of the left ear. The kettle hissed, steam curling into the air. Malik made tea by touch, the muscle memory of 1,000 evenings guiding his hands. He brought the cup to his lips but didn't drink. Something in his chest had coiled tight. Bruno's posture hadn't shifted in 30 minutes. He hadn't blinked when the neighbors upstairs slammed a door, hadn't reacted to the usual creaks of the old building settling into its bones. Malik turned off the lights. He preferred darkness, it leveled the field. But this darkness felt different. He moved slowly to the couch and sat, the tea cooling in his hands, untouched. Bruno remained by the door, eyes reflecting the faint city glow that bled through the curtains. Midnight passed. The ticking clock above the sink marked time like a countdown Malik couldn't read. He didn't sleep. He never did on nights like this. He sat still, legs stretched out, one hand resting on Bruno's leash even though it wasn't attached. At 1:17 a.m. the knock came. 3 taps. Firm. Spaced just enough to be intentional, not urgent, not random. Malik straightened but didn't rise. Bruno didn't bark. He stood up slowly, one paw at a time, his tail low, body aligned with the door like a drawn bow. Another knock. Then the voice. "Hey man, relax." Familiar, casual, uninvited. "I just want to talk." Malik didn't move for a long moment. He didn't need to ask who it was. His body knew. His skin knew. Bruno stepped forward and leaned his weight into the door. His head low, muscles tight. Malik spoke calmly, his voice steady despite the pulse hammering behind his ribs. "What do you want?" Chuck's voice was muffled but uninvited. "It's clearing the air. You know how it is. Things get tense." Bruno growled softly low, deliberate, a sound reserved for wolves and war zones. Malik rose slowly, one hand on the back of the couch for balance. "This ain't the time or the place." "Come on, man. Don't be like that," Chuck said. "I figured we had a misunderstanding earlier. No harm, no foul." There was a rustling sound, like feet shifting on concrete. Malik turned his head slightly. More than one pair of shoes. Bruno took a step back, placed himself directly in front of Malik now, facing the door head-on. Malik exhaled slowly. "You're not alone, are you?" Chuck laughed. A short, humorless burst, the kind of bark that hits the chest like a gut punch. The hallway outside fell silent. Then Chuck's voice again, a little flatter. "Look, I ain't trying to start anything. Just thought we could talk man to man." Malik reached for his phone with one hand, the other resting on Bruno's shoulder. He didn't dial. Not yet. He waited, listened, a soft tap against the window. Then another. Bruno spun, faster than Malik had time to process, nose to the blinds, growl deepening into a snarl. Malik clenched his jaw. "That's enough, I'm calling the cops." But before he could hit the button, Chuck's voice came again, this time with an edge. "You sure you want that kind of attention? Lot of things can go wrong in the dark." Bruno snapped his head back to the door, body vibrating with a look. Malik spoke with steel. "You need to leave. Now." There was a pause. Then, footsteps. Heavy, retreating, or pretending to. Bruno didn't relax. Not even an inch. Malik stood still, the phone still in his hand, the silence outside more threatening than the noise. And just before the hallway lights blinked off completely, he heard it again. A breath too close to the window. The breath outside the window was almost imperceptible, but Bruno had already heard it or felt it before the second exhale. Malik turned toward the sound, heart thrumming beneath his ribs like a drumline winding up for a war march. He moved toward the couch, gripping his phone tighter, thumb hovering over the emergency dial. Bruno hadn't taken his eyes off the window, his body frozen in that taut, low stance. Hind legs coiled like a spring, ears forward, tail still as a whim like ever are like it. Malik whispered his name, barely louder than breath. "Bruno." The dog didn't move. Malik reached the couch, extended a hand for the edge, just to orient himself in the room. He was about to speak again when Bruno moved not toward the door, not toward the window, but toward him. With no warning, Bruno launched forward and hit Malik square at the hips, pushing him hard and fast toward the floor. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a nudge. It was deliberate force, honed by repetition, the kind of maneuver that came from years of live-action drills. Malik fell backward with a grunt, his hand breaking the fall against the carpet, his phone skittering across the floor. "Bruno, what the hell?" he started, but stopped when the weight of the dog pressed fully into his torso, keeping him down. It wasn't panic. It was a position, trained, taught, remembered. Bruno's body hovered low over Malik's chest, protecting his head and core, tail curled inward. And then came the sound, a faint metallic click, followed by a slow, slicing skirk. Not from the hallway, from the window. Malik's eyes widened, though they saw nothing. His breath caught. He knew that sound, not a bird, not a branch, a blade, scraping rubber against glass, searching for the edge. Bruno's head whipped toward the source. His body lifted slightly off Malik, shifting weight from ribcage to paws, moving without breaking cover. Malik wanted to reach for the phone, but Brunata concurred. Another sound now. A soft creak. Wood under pressure. The window frame. Then a deeper scrape, metal against metal. A tool. Probably a screwdriver. Trying to find the lock. Malik didn't breathe. Bruno's body tensed, eyes narrowing, nose flaring wide. Malik could feel the tension rising through the floor, like the apartment itself was bracing. Then it happened. The sound snapped from whisper to scream. Crickets. He shot off Malik's chest and flew toward the window in a single, terrifying motion. Paws hitting floorboards with barely a sound. Claws catching just enough traction to launch. Malik rolled sideways instinctively, ducking lower behind the couch. What came next was chaos. A loud clang as the window slid open halfway. A breath, a surprised sharp inhale from outside. Then Bruno's snarl exploded through the apartment. Not the low growl from earlier, but a full-bodied, throat-deep war cry. Something screamed. A man's voice, sharp and high and filled with pain. There was a crash, glass or metal hitting brick. A body landing wrong, a thud. Malik scrambled toward the phone, palms shaking, breath ragged. He grabbed it, tapped the screen, voice barely controlled. Operator, police now. Intruder dog engaged. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. Malik barely heard it over the noise outside. Bruno hadn't returned. Malik crawled toward the edge of the room, feeling the rug, the legs of the table, reaching out blindly toward the window. Bruno, another rustle outside. Then the sound of retreating footsteps, fast, stumbling, uneven. Another scream. Then silence, not the peaceful kind, the breathless kind, the kind that left dust hanging in midair. The sirens came quickly, slicing through the velvet dark of the Glendale streets, red and blue reflections stuttering across the living room walls like silent alarms. Bruno had returned just before they arrived, his breath heavy, coat dusted with flecks of brick and gravel, his mouth closed but eyes wide, pulsing with fire not yet spent. He had a small scratch on his snout, nothing serious, but the way he moved said everything. Malik kept one hand on Bruno's side as officers pounded at the door. When he opened it, the lead officer's face shifted immediately from protocol to alert. One look at Bruno was enough. He stepped in carefully, asking questions in quick succession. What happened? Where did the noise come from? Did Malik see anyone? Malik answered calmly but clearly, pointing to the window and then the yard beyond. He came through there. Bruno intercepted. No time to see a face. But someone screamed. The officer nodded and gestured for his partner to sweep the perimeter. Flashlights sliced across the apartment walls, then outside through the yard, over the gravel, the patch of weeds, the base of the fence. Minutes later, one of the officers called out, "Got something." Malik couldn't see it, but he heard the tone, the shift in voice when a detail doesn't line up with coincidence. The officer returned moments later, glancing between Malik and Bruno before speaking. "There's blood out back, drops trailing from the window toward the alley. Looks like someone went down hard, scrape along the stucco and a fresh tear in the fence." Bruno let out a small huff, ears twitching. The officer continued, "Looks like the suspect was injured during escape. Claw marks deep." Malik pressed his lips together. He tried to break in. Bruno stopped him. "There was more than one out there." The officer nodded, taking notes. "We'll send the sample to the lab. If we get a DNA match, we'll have something solid." By sunrise, the officers had cleared the scene, promising extra patrols and regular check-ins. Bruno hadn't slept, neither had Malik. The apartment felt smaller, sharper somehow, like the air refused to settle. Malik sat by the kitchen counter, Bruno resting at his feet, eyes still trained on the door. The kettle hissed again, a memory from earlier repeating itself. But Malik didn't move to pour. He sat still, listening to the thrum of his own pulse. Then the knock came, not loud, not hurried, just 3 small raps at the door. Bruno rose but didn't bark. He looked toward Malik, waiting. Malik stepped forward slowly, not opening the door, just pressing his hand against the wood. "Who is it?" No answer. He waited, silence. Then he heard it, a soft shuffle, the slide of cardboard against tile. A package. Malik hesitated, then crouched, running his hand along the floor until he found it. Thick cardboard envelope, sealed, no labels. No stamp, no address, just weight. He brought it inside, sat down on the floor with Bruno beside him. He unsealed the top carefully, pulling free a stack of contents no thicker than a few photos. The first was glossy, a photograph. Malik's breath stopped. Chuck, standing beside a soldier, younger, not smiling, military fatigues. The other man, face square-jawed, steely-eyed, wore the same unit patch Malik had worn years ago and Bruno had once trained under. It was Sergeant Keller, the man who had trained Bruno from the ground up. But what chilled Malik more wasn't the photo itself. It was what lay beneath it. A second photo, an interior shot, dark, blurry, but in it a small red smear across a stair railing. Malik froze. The weight of the entire night pressed on him. Whoever had left this had been inside Chuck's past, or maybe still inside Chuck's circle. He looked down at Bruno. The dog was quiet, unmoving, but watching. Always watching. Malik didn't know what message the package truly carried, warning, threat, or invitation. But he knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't over. The envelope sat unopened again on the table, sealed once more after Malik had studied its contents in silence for over an hour. The photographs were back inside, carefully pressed between sheets of paper, as if by closing it, he could keep the past from bleeding further into the present. But even sealed, it radiated something heavy, unfinished, unresolved, like a wound stitched but still aching beneath the skin. The apartment had returned to its early morning hush, the shadows outside beginning to dissolve as the first touches of dawn scraped gently at the edges of the sky. Light entered the room not with fanfare but with reverence, like a blessing too soft to name. Malik sat on the floor, legs crossed beneath him, back resting against the couch. The world around him was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Every sound from the hallway, every flicker of motion behind the curtain, every creak of floorboard felt magnified, loaded. But through it all, Bruno remained next to him, silent, unmoving, guarding. And then, something shifted. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Bruno stepped forward, crossing the short space between them with a kind of careful gentleness Malik hadn't seen in years. Bruno didn't sit or stand. He pressed his body gently into Malik's side and lowered himself until he could crawl into the small hollow between Malik's knees and chest. Then, for the first time since they'd met, he did something Malik never expected. Bruno tucked his head under Malik's arm, pressing it close to his ribs, his nose brushing the inside of Malik's worn hoodie sleeve like a child seeking warmth. Malik froze, startled not by fear but by the weight of what that gesture meant. Bruno, the soldier, the guardian, the ever, not because he was tired, but because he trusted, and in that trust there was something sacred. Malik's hand rose slowly, unsure at first, then settled over Bruno's head. He didn't stroke or scratch, just rested there, palm open, letting the weight of connection fill the space where words had always failed. His throat tightened, his chest clenched. He leaned down, lowering his forehead until it pressed gently against the crown of Bruno's skull. The dog didn't flinch. He stayed, completely still. Malik swallowed hard, the morning light brushing against his face like a memory trying to resurface. He didn't fight it this time. He let the moment wrap around them like a blanket neither of them had realized they'd been cold without. And then, in the softest voice his body could produce, he whispered, "I don't need life to know who's with me." His voice cracked on the last word, a hitch in the air that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. "I just need you." Bruno's ear twitched. His tail thumped once, soft against the floor. No bark, no sound, just the simple, undeniable signal of presence, of agreement, of belonging. The apartment didn't suddenly feel safer. The world outside didn't suddenly get kinder. But Malik's heart did something he hadn't felt in years. It let go of the constant bracing, the constant calculation, and allowed stillness. Real stillness. Not the forced kind that follows trauma, but the chosen kind that grows from shared survival. The silence stretched, golden now with the sun finally cresting over the horizon, filling the corners of the apartment with fragile warmth. Malik sat back against the couch, pulling Bruno slightly closer, letting the dog rest his head fully in his lap. His fingers found the familiar ridges behind Bruno's ears, and stayed there, tracing nothing, just being. Malik's eyes useless as they were shut softly, not to block the world but to listen better. He could hear Bruno's breath, even and slow. He could hear the city beginning to stir, A car door slamming 4 buildings down. A coffee machine whirring to life above. And through it all he felt calm, not because the danger had passed, but because he understood something now, something clearer than sight. Chuck could return. The envelope might mean more trouble, the shadows could shift again, but this bond was stronger. This was his compass, his shield, his truth. Bruno lifted his head slightly, just enough to meet Malik's hand again. Malik smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't for show, it was for him. For them. "We'll be ready," he whispered, barely audible above the heartbeat in his own ears. Bruno's tail flicked again. That was all. No howl, no warning. Just a soft, quiet thump on the floor that said, "Always." Malik leaned back, letting the day begin. Not because he believed it would be easy, but because now, finally, he knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. In the end, he realized, you don't need sight to see loyalty, or love, or truth. You just need a heart willing to feel it. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. I'm curious, what part hit you the hardest? Was it the moment Bruno stood between Malik and danger? Or the final words in the silence of dawn? And one more thing, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments and let's see how far Bruno and Malik's bond has reached.